Welcome to the dark side of the rainbow. This is your host, Robert Wallace, and this is a Gays Against Groomers production. Today we have Dr. Simone Gold on with us. She's a doctor, she's an attorney, she's been standing up for the rights of Americans and patients during COVID, and now she's doing the work that needs to be done protecting kids. How are you doing, Simone?
Good, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. You had made a name for yourself during COVID and starting America Frontline Doctors, and that stance that you guys took at Congress or at the Capitol. You guys had this iconic video where you were spilling the beans on the medical health hoax that was happening, the suppression of information that people needed to get to know. And I remember at that time watching you. Tears. I was just so happy to see you guys out there standing against the world.
Thank you for the memory. It was definitely a very important moment for the nation. So just to share a little bit of my story with your viewers. So I was a board certified emergency physician for more than 20 years. As you mentioned, also a Stanford University educated attorney. And all of this, when COVID came, left me very equipped to understand what was happening and see what was happening in front of me in the ERs and in the law was very different than what the government and the media was saying. So as an ER doctor, I knew that early treatment medications worked because I gave them to patients, prescribed them, and they got better, and they got better very rapidly. Also, as an emergency physician, I was watching all the statistics and the numbers, and I knew, for example, that this didn't adversely affect children in any great way. If they got sick, it was awfully mild. And from a public health perspective, children provide a stopgap for the spread of a respiratory pandemic. So I was watching our government do everything exactly wrong. You don't give a vaccine in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. You don't isolate children from old people. It was all violative of Public Health 101, and the clinical medical was, not giving early treatment was also violated, everything with medicine. So that was me wearing my doctor hat. On the legal side, as a practicing physician in California, one day in April of 2020, I received a letter from essentially Governor Newsom. It was the medical board under his direction, saying that if I prescribed hydroxychloroquine for COVID patients, I could lose my license. This was shocking. And more shocking was they didn't say I couldn't prescribe hydroxychloroquine. They said I couldn't prescribe it for COVID. Do you understand? Like, I could prescribe it for rheumatoid arthritis. I could prescribe it for lupus, which are the classic reasons you do it in America. I could prescribe it for malaria if I had a patient traveling to Africa. I just couldn't prescribe it for a week for a patient for COVID. And I remember saying to my physician colleagues, how are you accepting this? That the government bureaucrats just telling you how you can practice medicine? There's no precedent for this. Doctors are licensed as individuals. We go to medical school and residency for a long time, not to have bureaucrats tell us what to do. So I saw the threat on the medical and I saw the threat on the legal, and I was highly alarmed. That led me to pull together doctors like myself. We became America's Frontline Doctors, and we stood on the steps of the Supreme Court in the summer of 2020. And we told the world that there's early treatment if you should want it, stop living in fear, stop being afraid, don't social distance, the mask. All of that was garbage. All of that was nonsense. I had no idea the onslaught that was coming after me after I said all that. But that's how I started speaking truth.
Wow, that's epic. And, you're a double juggernaut here because you have not just a medical background, but you have your background in law. You're an attorney. So that puts you in a very special position to be able to stand up for your rights as a doctor.
Yeah. And of the two, let me be straight up on this. The legal threat was far more severe than the medical threat. So on the medical side, if you just follow the CDC's own numbers, you were going to recover just fine from SARS-2. It wasn't that bad. The people that could get sick and die, the average person who got very sick and passed away from SARS-2 had 4 comorbid conditions. 4. You're talking heart disease and lung disease and diabetes. 4 comorbid conditions was the typical number that a person had if they passed away. Even in the very old group, the I don't want to say, nobody ever thinks of themselves at all, but in the group over age 70 or 75, without early treatment, you had a 93 or 95% chance of survival. Whoever heard those numbers? But that was the numbers according to the CDC. So what was all this fear mongering? And why in the world were we shutting the schools? Why is the government telling doctors that they can't practice medicine the way they've always practiced medicine as individuals? And why were pharmacies all of a sudden telling doctors that they couldn't prescribe certain medicines, which, by the way, is against the law? Pharmacies are not allowed to tell a doctor what they can and can't do. A pharmacy is only allowed to dispense medicine by pharmacy regulations. So the fact that the pharmacies were interfering, the fact that the state bureaucrats were interfering was highly illegal. The fact that we were essentially quarantining healthy patients. We had the shelter-in-place policies. People, if they didn't wear a mask, were getting arrested in California. It was unbelievable. There was no legal precedent for essentially quarantining or subjecting healthy people to protocols. We do have precedent in our nation if you're sick. For example, you have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. We're allowed to quarantine you. Our government, our nation has said that that's a thing. We can do that. But we don't have any legal precedent for quarantining or isolating healthy people, which is what shelter-in-place policies were. I was very alarmed at the lack of freedom. I was living in California. There was a man paddleboarding out in the Pacific Ocean, and he was like cited when he came back in because he didn't have a mask on. And I saw us descend into tyranny that it was unthinkable, and it became my mission in life to stand up for freedom.
Wow. What a time we're living in. And yeah, to see all that from your perspective as a doctor, to see them doing exactly the opposite and this very strange behavior of suppressing the one thing that would help that one group of people in particular.
Yeah. Could I just add to that? So, because I've spoken a lot about the law, but it was very offensive to me as a physician. I mean, I went to medical school and residency to help people. And I was actually told by my hospital that if I gave a person medicine that would help them, they would fire me. I mean, it was shocking for me to have the absolute proof that the hospitals and other doctors were working against a patient's best interest. And of course, that has led us, to what we're here to talk about today, but I am a direct witness to watching what I call the medical industrial complex hurt people. And I will stand up against it.
That's amazing. What a time to be in where that is exactly what we need, because it's happening everywhere. You're witnessing it, you're reporting it. And now the kids, okay, they did it on a national level to everybody indiscriminately. They claimed everybody was sick. But in the corners of the schools, we have, let's make your kids sick by confusing them about their gender and getting them on a protocol.
Yeah. So for me, this disconnect between reality and fantasy, we saw a lot of that during COVID, and we're seeing a lot of it with the treatment of youths who identify as gender dysphoric. But before we even turn to that, let's just remind ourselves what the government told us during COVID that was false and has been proven false, and they've pulled back from their position. So the government came out and said, you need to do 6 feet social distancing. We doctors knew that 6 foot social distancing was completely fabricated. There was zero science behind 6 foot. It had no basis in any medical reality. But what it did do was it forced the schools to close, because most schools could not do 6 feet between children's desks. That was the purpose of that, was to close the schools. It wasn't just a nuisance in circles on the ground, but it made it impossible for most schools. They didn't have enough space to put 30 kids in a classroom if they were 6 foot apart. That's what that did. So earlier this year, early 2024, Redfield, the former CDC director, literally pulled back. So did Fauci, saying they didn't have science behind the 6 foot social distancing. So we knew it was false. And the government has finally acknowledged that they were lying. They lied to the American people. So when we talk, as we continue to talk on today's discussion, keep in mind that we have a lot of evidence that the government lies to you for reasons that maybe you can't put together. But don't automatically believe things that the powers, the hierarchy, the powerful people are telling you. We have a lot of proof that they're not telling you things that are absolutely in their best interest. That would be one of them, 6 foot social distancing.
Yeah, I'm one of those types of people that if I go to the buffet, I might put a little dessert on my plate, but I'm not going to wait till I get to the dessert to taste it. And I say all that to say, I want to, instead of waiting, I kind of want to get to something you just touched on about the true intentions behind the people who are doing this, both with COVID and what they're doing with the kids and what this disinformation is meant to lead to. Because if it's not meant to bring us to health and wellness, it's meant to bring us to illness and destruction. To what end? Is this part of a depopulation agenda?
So I'll stick with things that I know, and then I think everyone can draw an obvious conclusion. So during the COVID years, Medicare had a policy that if a Medicare patient, an older patient, came into the hospital with COVID and they were sick enough to be hospitalized, which was everybody because they made a lot of money if you were hospitalized. If you went on the drug remdesivir, which doctors knew by its nickname, run, death is near. But if you went on remdesivir and not on the cheap generic ivermectin, the hospital got a bonus. Now, I submit to everybody, I understand the corruption where they try to sell you something that's bad, like remdesivir. Okay, there's the remdesivir lobbyists or like advocating to the hospital, sell this thing. I sort of get that. What I don't understand is why was that bonus linked to not being on ivermectin? Ivermectin saved lives. So why would Medicare have a policy in place that both gave you a drug that was too lethal for Ebola, which is a very lethal virus, but also you couldn't take the cheap, safe generic thing? So for me, I drew the conclusion that the Medicare policy was specifically to kill people. I mean, I don't know what other conclusion you can draw. The governor of New York killed thousands of nursing home patients. I don't know how familiar you are with all of that, but he allowed COVID recovered nursing home patients to go back to their nursing homes, forcing the hospitals not to disclose to the receiving nursing home that the person had COVID, which, by the way, is never done in medicine. When a hospital patient goes back to their home, which in this case is a nursing home, the nurse in the hospital always talks to the nursing home patient, gives them a rundown of what they went through in the hospital. And in this case, the governor blocked the hospital nurse from telling the nursing home nurse what the patient's situation was. So back at the nursing home, you commingled all these COVID nursing home patients with non-COVID nursing home patients, and the death rate was extraordinary. So the COVID subcommittee congressional report that just came out certainly made note of that. So what is the motive? I certainly think during COVID, there was an intended or unintended side effect of killing a lot of people that powerful people think are useless. If you go back and read the health advisor, last name Emmanuel, that advised Biden, he believes that people over a certain age just really shouldn't take up any resources anymore. And our neighbor to the north, Canada, has an absolute policy in place called MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying, which is now the 6th leading cause of death, where they just euthanize people who are sort of undesirable, maybe poor, maybe depressed, maybe autistic. So we are clearly have forces that want to get rid of less desirable people. That's on one end. The other end, I think there's related to that is a movement to bring down our nation and our freedoms, which relies heavily on a strong family unit. With the transgender issue for children, there's been such an attack on parental rights, and also during COVID, such an attack on parental rights, whereby children were allowed to consent to things that formerly they were not ever allowed to consent to. You look at that and you say, what about the mom and the dad? You're weakening the bond between parent and child, and you're giving the child parent authority over the parent, which all it can do is destabilize the family. So when I look at all of these things in the aggregate, that what we're seeing in the last, with the gender issues, 20 years now, 10 years has been terrible. They're really trying to, I think, go at the heart of Western civilization, which is a strong family unit. The family unit is the best bulwark against an aggressive, authoritarian, totalitarian state. So I think that's what they're going after.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think we're all seeing that. The dad's not at the home. Ever since the women's liberation, we've had the mother out, then we've got the kids in the school being indoctrinated, and then we see what's happening now. They've all been turned into little Octoberists, little Maoist, communist types, and the education system is churning out enemies right under our nose.
Listen, it's hard. I don't know if you've got children. I've got children. It's hard to raise children. And I would say it's almost impossible to raise children if the child is empowered above the parent. So there are states now that will allow a child to consent to things over a parent's objection, or there's a husband and wife that are divorcing and the judge puts his thumb on the scale that supports one political ideology. All of a sudden, the child is in charge. And I've raised children. You can't have a situation where the child is in charge over the parent, not only because children make foolish decisions, but it's very destabilizing to just the whole structure. For me, that's what the secondary gain of this gender ideology movement is. There's a lot of evil going on, on the ground level, like evil doctors doing evil things, confused children, all of that. But there are people above that are benefiting, which is it's really weakening the social fabric of America by a lot, actually. We all know that case, the father younger who's lost custody, and California is going to, let the mom castrate the son. How is this good for society to have a weakened parental unit? Like how, right? Again, as a lawyer, I follow these things as a doctor and a lawyer. So, Tim Walz was the VP nominee recently, and I looked up the law that he passed in Minnesota, and it was incorrect how he phrased it in his VP debate. But the legislation in Minnesota statute says that if a child has a connection to Minnesota, which you can interpret, I'll get back to that in a moment, but the law says if you've got a connection to Minnesota and you present yourself and you say you're this gender and your parent isn't going along with it, the state could take custody and then have Medicaid pay for the surgeries. And I thought to myself, as a lawyer, what is the connection component? Like if you're a Texas child or Florida child that wouldn't put up with this, or Tennessee, which is, in the Supreme Court this week, but then the child is mad at mom and dad and doesn't agree with mom and dad and gets on a plane and lands in Minneapolis. Is that a connection to Minnesota that is strong enough that it allows the state of Minnesota to take custody? These are the things I think about as a doctor and a lawyer. That case has never come forward, but I think it could. I think you could have a 15-year-old Texan who drives up to Minnesota and says, I'm here, I'd like the surgery, and the parents are out because in the statute, the Minnesota statute says that they're not going to cooperate with the state from which the child arose. And I think that's a states' rights issue. I think it's a parental rights issue. I don't know why certain states are not fighting back. There's a few states that are doing this. Minnesota, Colorado, California are three of them. And if I was, for example, an attorney general in a different state, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, other states, I would push back on those states and say, you have no right to assert authority over my state child. But that's the law in Minnesota. And that's the law that Tim Walz was very proud of.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, absolutely what we're up against. And it's just, I don't have children. If I had children, I would homeschool them. I don't know if I would bring children into the world just because of how it is. I kind of want kids, but then I look around and I just feels very, very rough chances of them getting out with, a uncorrupted mind. I think it all goes back to, even though Gays Against Groomers isn't a religious show, I think we've lost the fear of God in the society, and the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. And we don't have that, so we've gone off the rails already. And kids, I thought I was asexual when I was growing up, and that was before all this. So I was ready to castrate myself at the age of 21, 22, 23. I thought that'd be a great idea. And if it wasn't for my mom doing a little intervention and asked me to wait a year, which I had wanted to for over a year, I might have been able to go through with it. But now you are able to get into the situation before you've had any time, before you've had any years or time to talk with anybody about it. And then you're going to be walking around the rest of your life transformed in a way that you would not have gone through with if you had all these.
Yeah. And there's really no, thank God for your mom, right? There's really no end point in sight. So more recently, there's people who identify as eunuchs, and WPATH, this evil activist organization, says, oh, they have a right to be a eunuch. And we doctors are supposed to cut everything off. And I'm just stunned at this, and I don't think Americans know about this, which is why America's Frontline Doctors got together with some amazing physicians, and we talked about it, and we brought to, the big movie screen what it is that we're talking about. Like, what is the treatment of gender dysphoria in children? Where did this come from? What's the proper way to treat it? What's the true incidence of it? What happens if you go through these treatments? What do these treatments entail? What happens if you decline these treatments? We hear the other side saying your kids are going to kill themselves. We hear all this stuff. So what are the facts? What's the truth? So this movie that we did, What is a Doctor, really goes through the facts, the truth, because that's really what's missing from the debate or the conversation. We hear this phrase, gender affirming care. I'm very offended by this. If you've ever, of course, you've heard of this, but if you're just listening to the show for the first time and you've never heard this, gender affirming care sounds lovely. That just sounds like a beautiful thing. It's affirming, it's care. What a positive thing. This is a misnomer. This is like saying in the book 1984, the Ministry of Truth, the Ministry of Truth that was designed to put out all the propaganda. That's what gender affirming care. It's not affirming any in a positive way. It's definitely not doing care. It's doing mutilation. And I hate to break the news to people, but there's only two sexes that mammals can have. Mammals, there are only two. So we break down the science. It's not a political movie. We bring you the science, we bring you the facts, and we teach you what it is when they're saying gender affirming care.
Well, that's a lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead and play this trailer right now. So here is the trailer for the new film, What is a Doctor? False start. Here we go.
Somebody comes to us when they are the most vulnerable. We have an obligation to our patients to tell the truth as we learned it and to not politicize it. We are performing surgeries on these children that have neither the capacity to make these life-changing decisions nor the wisdom, and the only people benefiting is the medical industrial complex, because the more surgeries that are done, the more money it is made.
Whether you're talking about an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old, I don't see how you can actually derive informed consent.
We all know that we can't be getting true informed consent.
It didn't really realize, but there was a sickness that had been afflicting the profession for a long time.
Our medical industry has objectively been compromised in more ways than one.
You become familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead.
That was powerful. I saw we had Eitan Hyman there, Miriam Grossman. He had some other heavy hitters. And what an important message. So what did you learn while making this film?
First of all, the movie is really explosive. We don't shy away. So I'm encouraging everybody to watch it. We've made it available for free. These things are not free to produce. They cost a lot of money and time and blood, sweat, and tears. But we know that everybody needs to watch it. You can find it at whatisadoctor.org. You will not be bored, I can assure you. I learned so much over the last year about the gender issues for our children. Again, I mentioned I've got 2 children and I've been a doctor for 25 years. I can tell you that the incidence of this has gone through the roof over the last 10 years, for example, 7 years. And there is no biological explanation for such a change in the numbers. So when you watch the movie, you learn and you understand how children are being used as a political pawn for gender activists to raise their numbers, put this child on a pathway to earn a lot of money for the medical industrial complex, never mind that the child's life ultimately really ends up destroyed. When I was in medical school, I had the unusual experience of working with 2 gender identity disordered patients. That's what it was called back then in the 90s. I say unusual because it's exceedingly rare, and I happen to be at a very large county hospital, which happened to have a program for gender identity disorder. I don't know any of my peers who've ever worked with these patients. That's how rare it was. But it happened that I was in an elective where I was doing this at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. I know exactly how we used to treat gender dysphoria, and it's the exact opposite of what we're doing now. First and foremost, you were never allowed to treat children. Period. Hard stop. Nobody would have considered it. Hard stop. Out of the question. Even for adults, the pathway to getting surgery or hormones took years. You needed to see multiple specialists. You needed to have very extensive psychological work in group therapy and individual therapy for months to years. You had to live as the opposite sex for a long time before you even considered eligible. All of those rational, common sense, precautionary measures that doctors did to be sure that we selected the tiny numbers of persons who would be appropriate for hormones or surgical treatments have all gone by the wayside. We all saw the movie that Matt Walsh did, What is a Woman, and how somebody had a 20-minute telehealth consult, and they were approved for radical treatments that landed a person for lifelong sterility. So we are showing you how things have changed in a very short time, because the amnesia or the fact that you weren't familiar with that might lead a person to think this is normal. It's not normal. It was never done this way. Doctors never acted this way. Another thing that you'll learn is that this diagnosis of gender dysphoria is clearly wrong. Gender dysphoria was classically diagnosed, really essentially middle-aged men who had an issue really all of their life since they were little children. And then they grew up to be cross-dressers. Many turned out to be gay, but that was kind of the population there where you saw this rare condition. Now, all of a sudden, you're seeing huge numbers of adolescent females that suddenly are having these ideas of gender distress over a period of a few months once they've gotten flooded with social media that rewards them for having these beliefs. The intersectionality scale that we're living on, if you're just a white girl, but now you could be a transgender boy, like you get a lot more social affirmation. So the fact that we've gone from being kind of a middle-aged male disorder that was very rare to an epidemic of adolescent females who very rapidly come up with this. It's not gender dysphoria. It's called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And they are as different as diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2. It's a social contagion. It's not the same thing. So we go through that. Where did all this come from? You probably know the story of John Money. I won't talk about it now, but you're going to find out where this all came from. And then we're going to talk about who's doing this, who's profiting, who's making money, and what we can do about it. We can talk later in the show, but there is a case in the Supreme Court just 2 days ago on this. And so there's a lot that we're doing on it, but the movie is explosive. It's filled with information.
Wow. And I love that you hit on this point just a second ago of rapid onset gender dysphoria being a social contagion. Like, you wouldn't believe it. How is, they're saying 40% of Gen Z is identifying somewhere on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. And the Q is just 70, 80 gender identities, which includes, I like to have a conversation before I have sex. So, it really includes every little peculiarity characterized just to kind of split the world. It seems like when we're looking at the progressive flag, we're looking at the whole world against straight white men and women. Yeah. Because even in the gay pride flag, we have the brown and black stripes, chevron to indicate people of color.
There's so many things wrong with it. Obviously it's very divisive. At the core, there is a God question, and people who recognize the evilness of this really do become more aware that they're being driven by an understanding that there really is a God in the world. And the reason I say that is all of us are special. All of us are special. All of us are unique. So why does there have to be we've all lost track of how many initials are at the end of that LGBTQ, whatever it is. People are just looking to be recognized as unique individuals. But if you believe that there's a God and humans are made in God's image, we know that you're unique. We hear you, we see you. You don't have to be identified by some quirk of your personality that you're a whole different class or category. You're a special individual human being. That's who you are. And, one of the things I'd love to talk with you about, and one of the reasons I really wanted to do this show is I just felt that the LG, the LG community got very hijacked by all of this stuff. Most of us know many stable homosexual families or couples. This is not that. This is predators. As far as I'm concerned, these are trans predators. There are people out there that are existing to exploit a group of people, in this case, youth, and also a little older than, even in their 20s. For some reason, it could be financial, it could be political, but they're predators. And this is not what gay rights were about when gay rights started. So I'm just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That is the truth. That is the gospel of what we're slinging over here too. It's the LGB community has been hijacked, and right now there is a massive movement in some areas in society and some groups. It's really about cutting the TQIA, saying being same-sex attracted and then being in the wrong body are like not like the same thing at all. But because there is that overlap with so many trans members being gay, and and gay people with autism, and there's that overlap, and it brings this whole little monolith together. And what can a gay person possibly say for or against trans people in a certain way, except it's not so simple when your name is being dragged through whatever they're advocating. So all of a sudden you have to start standing for something and putting your foot down and saying, just because you're trans, just because we've all been through the ringer in life as far as historically being accepted by society, that doesn't mean that the struggle is the same. It doesn't mean our causes are the same. And especially nowadays, we see with this kind of establishment type gay community.
Well, if you want to know, I have a lot to say in this. For one thing, I actually think it's a bit of an attack on gay people, because a lot of the people who are coming through these transgender youth programs are gay. And they're 15, they're 16, they're being told that they're a girl, for example. It's like, why can't you just be gay? Like, what's wrong with that? So I actually think, paradoxically, there's a bit of an attack on that. And here I'm going to offer some medical information, which is why I want everyone to watch the movie. So, people that were historically fighting for gay rights were fighting for the right to, to live as a full human being and enjoy the full range of human expression. But the kids that are going through the surgeries and the hormone, the majority of them end up in a life that they cannot function sexually, and more often than not, cannot actually have sexual pleasure. So this is one of the reasons we did this movie, because me as a lawyer, I submit that there's no way that there is being informed consent happening. I don't believe that you're telling a 15-year-old boy that, he may never have an orgasm. This is the kind of stuff we're bringing in the movie. We're going to give you the statistics and the numbers. And it turns out the majority of people who go through these horrific mutilating procedures do not have a good sex life afterwards. So I want there to be clear distinction in people's minds between this group of people that I believe is being exploited, people that are going through a hard time, maybe have autism or depression or anxiety or just normal teenage angst over like a changing body or a difficult situation. Maybe they were abused in their life and they need therapy for that. That is very, very different than the false promise of do all these hormones and do all the surgery and you'll be happy one day. Not at all. Some of the statistics now are showing that you go through all of these treatments and your rate of suicide is actually higher than if you just left it alone. And another thing you'll learn in the movie is that the vast majority of children actually outgrow their gender distress if you let them go through puberty normally. You asked me what I learned this year. I actually didn't know all of that. And it's why I need to speak out, because if you've got a 15-year-old girl, 17-year-old girl, and she's going to outgrow whatever hard time she's going through, but you don't even allow her to get to the other side, and not even allowing her to get to the other side, and you're chopping off her breasts, and you're kind of interfering with her reproductive functions, and you stop her ability to ever create viable eggs in her life, when it was a temporary situation, is really upsetting, and we doctors needed to speak out.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And thank you for doing and saying all that. I actually had, if I should have taken better notes because there was three things I had in my head to say back to you. But
I speak a lot.
yeah, no, it's good though. That's exactly what you're here for. The gay community has, unfortunately, the narrative of what we're doing here has been taken over by the mainstream media, social media, the people who are promoting the certain influencers and demoting those whose messages they don't want them to hear. These kids are taking it up, and they think that's what it is to be a human, is to lean into your identity, your sexual identity, and to fight this war against the Republicans so you can. And it's like, no, there was a time when, you were striving for something more than an identity, striving for more than being at war with something or being against something. But nowadays, it's like, if they don't have activism, if they don't have identity politics, a lot of these kids have nothing, and not even information, thanks to the schools. Oh, that's what it was. The suicidality. Some people make the case that the suicidality is way more for the trans youth and non-trans youth, but there's actually a difference between suicidality and actual suicides, and that actually goes up by about 3 times to about 3% after transitioning than before. So there is kind of this red herring, a false straw man argument with suicidality versus actual suicide.
Yeah, that's a really important point. First, everyone needs to watch this movie. Whatisadoctor.org. It's going to blow your mind with information. One of the things I can tell you as an emergency physician is there's a complete difference between completed suicides and people with suicidal thoughts. It's an entirely different population. The facts have shown that offering people or putting people through the hormonal manipulation and the surgery is not reducing the rate of suicide. By the way, the rate of suicide is still very, very low. The rate of completed suicide is very, very low in both groups, those who've gone through hormones and surgery and those who haven't, but it's not improved by going down the aggressive path. And what definitely happens by going down this aggressive path is you've committed yourself or your child to becoming a lifelong patient for the rest of your life. At a bare minimum, you need you're lifelong attached like an umbilical cord to the medical industrial complex. You need meds for the rest of your life. You need to dilate, which is a very painful procedure, for the rest of your life. The odds of you having a normal sexual function are quite low. You just watch the movie and you'll hear. The odds that you're going to have chronic wound complications that are severe are very substantial. And I suppose the worst part of all, the biggest scam of all, is that we've told children that they can be the opposite sex. So they go through all of these things. They can't have orgasms. They can't have kids. They can't breastfeed. They have to dilate. They have chronic wounds. And yet they still can't get to the promised land as they've defined it. What do I mean? Every cell in the human body is XX or XY. There's a very tiny, tiny number of people born that are what we used to call intersex, that have some chromosomal abnormalities. But every mammal is oriented towards either making sperm or making egg. Typically, it's XY or XX. So no matter how much testosterone you take or estrogen and progesterone, no matter how much hormones you take, it will always land on an XX brain cell, always land on an XY liver cell or heart cell. It can't change. You cannot fundamentally change your sex. It doesn't matter what you take, what you do, how much cosmetic procedures you have, what you put in, what you take away, what hormones you take. Your brain is still always going to be XX or XY. So for me, it's a real bait and switch that they're doing to young people who can't understand. They think they're going to reach the promised land. I do know, especially because of my experience in medical school, that there are a few people out there who do have true gender identity disorder, or what we call gender dysphoria. I believe Caitlyn Jenner, for example, is such a person. This is a person who all of her life, she felt a certain way, even though she's living as a male, born as a male, XY, but always felt something off. It's beyond my scope of intellect to understand how such a thing happens. But do I believe it's a real thing that happened? For sure. And it was very consistent over decades and decades. That person has a certain path ahead of them. But the vast majority of people that we're talking about are not that. We're talking about 15-year-old girls who get online, watch YouTube videos, get a lot of secondary gain and social affirmation for calling themselves trans, and they end up on this treadmill of the medical industrial complex where such a girl or boy is worth about $1 million per child to the medical industrial complex. We need to stop that. And so my mission is to stop the physicians who are doing this. We're going to stop them by embarrassing them. We out them. We call them out by name in the movie. We say who the worst offenders are, because I know that if we put a couple of these medical batterers in jail, the industries will close up shop.
Wow. It really comes down to just pointing out the people who are doing the thing. And that is such a huge part of the narrative of what we're experiencing day to day. Is it seems like the same few people seem to be pulling the strings, holding the reins, whether it's politically or whether we're talking at the level of Fauci medically, in the COVID context, or in whatever. So if we just get these big guys who are kind of controlling the narrative for the rest of the physicians, what people are, this discipline will heal itself.
There are doctors, I'm very proud to stand with there are many doctors now that are coming out for sure. There's an organization called Do No Harm. They put out a whole database of doctors and hospitals that are doing the wrong thing. There's most people know that this is evil. I don't want anyone to say it's bad. It's evil. And they recognize that. And they're silenced by a lot of people aren't saying anything, but most of those people not saying anything are profiting financially. So when you stop the funds, and so there's no artificial propping up of these interests, everyone else will suddenly start speaking out. So you probably saw this week, Vanderbilt closed its clinic, the whistleblower, Dr. Heim, Texas closed theirs. You have to stop the money. When you stop the money, people will then start feeling freer to say what they know and call it the evil what it is. This is evil. And I really do call them trans predators. The doctors who are doing these things, when you look at them, they have very confused backgrounds themselves. And you know that expression, misery loves company? If you had a miserable experience in your own childhood, in your youth, that was Dr. John Money, for example. You had a miserable experience. Instead of healing yourself and going on to do good in the world, another option is to share the misery. When you look at the background of a lot of these doctors, they had miserable experiences, and now they're, I think, in a sense, to make themselves feel better, they're sharing the misery with these children who are looking at them. They're wearing white coats like me. They think that they're respectable, and they're scaring the parents by saying your child will kill themselves if you don't go down this mutilating path. So I'm hopeful that in the next pretty short time, I think months to within a couple of years, we're going to shut this industry down.
The largest scale, at the highest level, what organizations globally, nationally, do you think we can do without? We see with the Department of Efficiency, we're talking about getting rid of like the Department of Education. There's all sorts of things we're getting rid of. What do you think is the problem?
Well, this is like one of the most exciting things now is that there's going to be a Department of Government Efficiency that has announced its expiration date. So you know that they're for real. And you know that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have better things to do than try to fix the government. So I'm so excited about that. Yes, I think the Department of Education should be abolished. As a lawyer, and I say that as a lawyer, education belongs to the states. We are different states: Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, New York, California. We're different. We need local control over education. You're not going to learn the same thing in Louisiana as California. I get that. And that is a good thing. We don't need a federal Department of Education. It belongs to the states. As far as I'm concerned, it needs to go by the wayside. Now, how that looks, how you accomplish that, it's not easy to, dismantle the whole government. But I also want to share with people, the Department of Education only came about under Jimmy Carter. Like, it's 40 years. That's it. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, I was at a speech where he was about 2 weeks ago, and he said that we now have more government agencies than years that our country has been alive. In other words, we have created more than 1 or 2 agencies per year. So that is ridiculous. So yes, I'm a big fan of like getting rid of most of the federal bureaucracy, and especially in the medical space. The CDC has outgrown its usefulness, in my opinion. They started to track malaria after World War II and during World War II, and to make itself like stay alive, because that's what government agencies do. They kind of expanded their mission, but they became very oppressive. By the way, COVID wasn't the first time I saw the CDC oppressiveness. It was 10 years ago. It's a whole nother show that we could do together. But the CDC, I think, should be way curtailed. The FDA, in my opinion, just because you asked, the FDA approves medications, food and drugs. So I'll stick with the drug lane. I'm more knowledgeable about that, for safety and efficacy. I'm going to put an idea out there for you. I think that they should approve things for safety. I don't think they should do efficacy. Efficacy is how effective a drug is. I think the marketplace of ideas, doctors, and patients can determine what is effective. I think it is appropriate for government to determine what's safe. We don't necessarily have to have a bunch of unsafe things out there, but effectiveness is where they got us with the ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine. They had the gall to say these things weren't effective, which of course they were, but why are they allowed to weigh in on effectiveness at all? Once a drug is approved for market, a doctor can use it in any way they see fit. We've got a lot of medical malpractice regulations that can constrain a doctor from doing radical things. So let the market, the doctors and the patients decide if something's effective. Let's let the FDA only do the safety. Another problem with the FDA is a lot of it is funded by pharmaceutical companies. More than half of its budget now comes from pharmaceutical companies. I'm very hopeful that Robert Kennedy is going to put a stop to pharmaceutical advertising. That's a big one. And remove the liability shield that vaccine manufacturers had. So let's just reduce the size of the overall federal government in general. And let us look, for example, in the transgender space, how government money is being spent on these transgender programs. All of these large universities that are doing these transgender mutilating surgeries, they're all getting federal money. I don't understand that. There are, like I told you, that Medicaid, which is state money in Minnesota, is paying for this for children. There are other states that are doing that as well. I don't understand why the taxpayers are paying for these things. There's lots of opportunity.
I mean, it reminds me of how drugs flow into this country, how pretty much every problem we have, there's some player, somebody behind the scenes at the FBI or CIA. We saw what happened with open borders. It's like they're doing this on purpose. The people who have the power to stop it are obviously the gatekeepers. And this is what they're pushing to happen.
Well, I think we're all, at least in my lane, the health lane, I think we're all so happy that we have a disruptor who is coming in as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Buckle up, because they're going to say terrible things about him. I know him well. I know him personally. He's a very fine human, a very fine human being, and who loves America, and really is a shining example in his own life of just being healthy and advocating for health. So let's just see what happens over the next, year to 2 years. I'm super optimistic.
Yeah, me too. Everybody in this cabinet, RFK, everybody and their mother that he's putting on is going to make a dramatic transformation for this country. When I was, thinking about Fauci, for instance, about COVID, I also think about, I don't know, did you see that video where the World Economic Forum, I forget the name of the organization, but they had this woman coming up talking about their agenda or their role towards bringing about equal rights for gays and the trans. And so at the level of the World Economic Forum, globally, they want to push these things that we're fighting here locally. They want that everywhere. So as a doctor lawyer, how high up are your sights right now? And, how far back do you think the controlling powers go?
I don't think their issue is trans or gay rights. I think their issue is dividing people so that certain elites can have more power. So this is a soft spot for freedom-minded people. So I think it's an area that can be exploited for divisiveness. Now, in general, we have to be very leery of centralized power. So World Economic Forum wants to have centralized power. Our best defense against that is to decentralize power. That's why I'm a big fan of states' rights, a big fan of reducing the size of the federal government, and a big fan of removing ourselves from organizations like the UN, which I think has done a lot of evil in the world. I think that if we decentralize power, and we're just one nation, and within a nation we have different states, we will have success, and success will bring people to us. So the people over here that are less successful will look at us and say, I want more of that. And I think that's the way to go. So I want America to live in freedom, in liberty, small government, and it will be so attractive. We'll be wealthier, happier, healthier, longer lives, more freedom. And that will be so attractive to other people that one by one, the others will collapse. That was really the strategy that Ronald Reagan did against the USSR, right? It was certainly the Cold War, but mostly we were just doing better, and it was more desirable and more attractive. And I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I think that is the way to go. Our government was formed as a constitutional republic, not as a democracy. And I don't know how many times people need to hear this, because even Trump and everybody in the right calls it a democracy. But that's one step closer to socialism. Our constitutional rights give us inalienable rights. They establish that you have the right to speak freely and to protect yourself. These cannot be taken away from you. But when we talk about a democracy, we talk about mob rule and actually voting away these so-called inalienable rights. And so, yeah, I agree with you that smaller government, that's the way to go. And just as a reference point, what I was referring to earlier about the World Economic Forum is their affiliation with PGLE, and that is the Partnership for Global LGBTI Equality. And it's a coalition of organizations, including the WEF, World Economic Forum, aiming to accelerate LGBTI equality and inclusion in the workplace and broader communities. Funding members include Accenture, Boston Consulting Group, Cisco, and others. So I think it goes into those SGI scores, or ESG.
Yeah. So, no humans should be human rights, inalienable rights should be trampled upon. So you could be gay, you could be straight, I'm Jewish, somebody might be Catholic, Protestant, whatever. All human beings should be treated with human dignity. And there was certainly a time when we did not do that for gay people. Absolutely. And there was certainly a time we didn't do it for Black people. There's still today, and since October 7th, there's a tremendous attack on Jewish people. We need to treat all people with the same inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We do not need to carve them up into tiny micro slices of humans that feel particularly oppressed. That is only going to lead to more division. We fight for all humans to be treated honorably, ethically, right? I like to remind people that the most oppressed minority of all is not the woman, is not the trans, is not the gay, is not the Jew. The most oppressed minority of all is the individual. So the more you slice away, the trans person's oppressed, the gay person's oppressed, the Jew is oppressed, the woman's oppressed, slice, 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 slice. Why not just treat each individual honorably? That is what our Bill of Rights is. It's why it took our founding fathers a long time to write it. It took a lot of years for them to put it together. Every person has these inalienable rights. If we honor that, all people will be treated well.
That's what it comes down to. Every religion has the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, or you get what you give. And if we could live that, we would have our little utopian society. But unfortunately, yes, we've had identity politics weaponized, and we've got this idea that we need to oppress others to ensure our succession or whatever. And that's just like preemptively creating these culture wars. And it's very sad. But it's like we were saying earlier, with the LGBT people, look, these people, us gays, we've got our rights. Like, I'm gay married. I don't have any problems, anything that needs to be up in the public light about. I think we got enough issues. I don't see any reason why I should flip past really any gay news at all at this point. It should all be about securing this country. Unfortunately, there are so many who think that they are going to lose their rights unless it keeps growing.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I think most Americans really want to go back to the days that we didn't know who slept with who. Like, that's the truth. I had no idea as a child going to school. It never occurred to me if my teacher was gay or straight. And I think people would say that I was secretly prejudiced against people that weren't gay, that people were gay because I didn't know and I wasn't aware of it. I'm like, I'm a child. I don't need to know. I don't want to know anything about my teacher's business. Like, I think most Americans would really just want to get back to that. There are doctors now that are activists with their patients in the emergency room. I couldn't believe this. I came across that story a few months ago where it was a few months before the election, and they're activist doctors that were telling their patients how to vote. And I thought, oh my God, that is just literally horrific. Like, obviously I've got my own strong political beliefs, but if you're a doctor in a doctor-patient relationship and you're in an ER with somebody, that patient feels really vulnerable. Like, you're supposed to be there for that patient. That patient's feeling really weak and vulnerable and scared and frightened and maybe in pain. And you're literally going to talk to them about your political. I couldn't even believe it when I came across this. I think that should be flagrantly illegal. I think you should lose your license for that. But leave it alone. I mean, I don't have any trouble treating patients who don't agree with my politics, because let's just like leave a lot of these things out. Remember, I think you might have been old enough to grow up when your parents said to you, we don't talk about politics, money, or religion, right? I'd like to get back to those days, like where we don't have to know everything about, who somebody's sleeping with.
Absolutely agree. I've never been less interested in gay culture right now than I am. It is, it's very sad that it hasn't really, it's devolved and it's becoming this thing where when you think of gay people, now you're thinking of politics, now you're thinking of like this whole trans fight, when most of the gay people are at home, minding their business, being quiet. But you got a few radicals, you've got the media who loves the story, and you do have the very real issue of a growing agenda on children in the school. So it's not, we can't close up shop, unfortunately, but I'm right there with you. I'd rather not have to talk about my sexuality. Unfortunately, Gays Against Groomers exists because we actually have a problem, and we have to come out and say, it's not just straight people that think this is a problem. Yeah. Gay people are against it too.
I think, honestly, I knew of your organization for a few years, and I just think that you have a special role in this because there's so much criticism, verbal slinging, cancel culture hurled on people, and at least you take away, oh, you're homophobic. Really? No, I don't think so. But at least that can't be slammed at you. And I think it's important. And all of us have a lot of gay friends. I think gay people, a lot of straight friends, and straight people, a lot of gay friends. And, no normal adult who cares about other people wants to groom any other person, let alone a child, for someone else to exploit. So I should start a group, Doctors Against Groomers is what I should start, because I see these doctors as groomers. I see them as predators. I don't think it's just like a dispassionate, neutral doctor doing this. I've looked into some of their backstories. I think they're getting some kind of thrill. Some of them, it could be a sexual thrill. A lot of them, they're getting a lot of money or a feeling of self-importance. But there is some predatory thrill that they're getting. So no normal, altruistic oriented adult wants to support people who are grooming other people.
That is a great point. The thing is, there's a lot of people that think, oh, there's some people who don't like gays no matter what. And we'll get that too. They'll be like, oh, it's the perverts policing the perverts or whatever, calling perverts perverts. There's a difference between gay people and groomers. There's a difference between gay people and what is out there. And if it's only for the silence, it's people take that silence as a tacit agreement that people are thinking, oh, this is what the gays want. They want more representation in schools for their little gay offspring so they don't have the same problem. But that's the whole problem, is there are in every community and every niche, there's pervs, there's perverted straight people, perverted Black people, white people of every niche. They're all over. It's only because it's particularly in the gay community that we see members of the gay community attacking society at large with these ideas that, yeah, we definitely are going to call it out from within our ranks. And you raise an amazing point. Doctors who are doing their own form of grooming with their little indoctrination or how they lead people, that is as terrible or worse, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and I also want to speak up for the fact for like what you're doing. I mean, I've got children, and they did not grow up in a world that was really prejudiced against gay people. Like their youth was different than mine. But I am old enough to know that if you were growing up gay, even in the 80s, definitely in the 80s, maybe less so in the 90s, but even in the 80s, you definitely suffered. I mean, that's not that long ago, but I would say in the 2000s, you really weren't so much. So it's very important to acknowledge that there was violence and negativity and hate hurled towards gay people. So the fight for gay rights was real. It's just, this is not that. The fight for gay rights was because there really was an intolerance there. I haven't seen people being intolerant towards trans people. We just haven't seen that. So I'm just reminding people that there was this intolerance in the past. I think mostly it's over. You can never get perfection. But this is not that. This is grooming and predatory behavior, especially towards kids. And it's sexual in nature, and it's causing children to have their entire life, the next 80 years of their life, to have a malformed, malfunctioning body that has chronic wounds and dependency on doctors forever. This is not that.
Amen. It is not that. The grooming, the sowing of this whole ideology, this is being done by the media, by these companies who are flagging up their organizations. They know what they're really pushing. They're not even pushing the gay anymore. It's really about pushing the trans thing. And you know what you got coming up right behind that? You've got the MAPS, the minor attracted people. So we have people who are mentally ill, who don't know their sexuality. And then we've got people who are identifying as objects. And then we have people who are identifying as babies. Maybe they want to play within a diaper and they want an adult with them. You got people who identify as child lovers. So as soon as you take off the cap of rationality and binary, all of a sudden, all the abstractions start. All of a sudden, the LGBT becomes a umbrella for a whole bunch of crazy weirdness.
Yeah. And that again, that is not what gay rights were about. Gay rights were about, it was true that gay men could absolutely be targeted and violence and epithets hurled at them. That is entirely different than what we're going through now. What you mentioned is actually very, very frightening. This minor attracted persons, they're trying to normalize pedophilia. And it's the imbalance of power is so extreme between an adult and a youth that a society that allows minor, adults to have sexual relationships with children is a society that's finished. It's kaput. And that's also why you said, even though you don't think of yourself as so religious, so you can't help but see religion here. You can't help but see God here, because it's just, viscerally that this is wrong. The power dynamic between a 13 and a 14-year-old, God forbid even younger, and an adult it's not overcomable. This is why the Greek culture collapsed. It's a reason contributing to why the Greek culture collapsed. We react in horror when we see this in a lot of Islamic countries. Well, they're married 38-year-old men to 14-year-old girls, and we all react with horror, but we're all supposed to think it's okay here because it's woke and progressive. No, there's an absolute right and an absolute wrong, and a society that allows its children to be abused and exploited is a society that's in decline.
It sure is. And now we've got the trafficking is the biggest story of the day, thanks to Sound of Freedom, making a scene of it. People are aware now. We've got like 600,000 to 800,000 children lost in our country every year. We have 80-something thousand lost over the border. Where could you possibly hold that many human beings? How could you traffic them in broad daylight. They're underground. They're going into places we don't know, and they're going all over the world. It's terrible.
Yeah. And the relationship between what you're saying and what we're talking about is that people can't be afraid to say the truth and say reality and say and put a stake in the ground and say this is wrong. You can't traffic humans for you just can't do it. It's not an object, and you can't sexualize children. It's not permissible. Yeah, and then again, in the medical lane that I'm in, we doctors want to bring the facts to you, because the average person who's never dealt with this in their life, your natural reaction is to be very compassionate, because we're Americans, we're just like a compassionate, warm people. But mostly Americans have been misled on this issue, and your compassionate nature has been exploited, quite frankly. And you don't understand until you watch movies like this. And I don't know any other movie like this, but what is a doctor.org? We will show you exactly what they're doing to children. And then when you watch this and you hear this and you learn of this, you know that you have to say something. You know that it's false to be silent in some kind of false compassion. Nobody is saying that you shouldn't be kind to all humans. Of course, you should be kind to all humans, but you cannot allow children to have their bodies destroyed. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. One of the small things that we mentioned in the movie is you go through these surgeries and 35% of people end up with what's called a fistula. And when I learned that fact, I couldn't believe it, because that sounds like just a word to you, Robert, fistula. It is a horrific thing. I used to see them all the time in the ER. It's when there's an abnormal connection between two places that shouldn't connect. So if you have a fistula between the tube where you pee and your skin, or the tube where you pee, the urethra and the anus and the rectum, so you have a pathway that shouldn't be there. And if you have a fistula, it's a horrific situation. It's very malodorous. It's unhygienic, chronic infection. You're higher risk of death with it, multiple surgeries. And when I learned that 35% of people who go through these surgeries have a fistula, I think the number was 35%. And of that 35%, I think 25% or so were permanent, could never be fixed. This blew my mind. You can't possibly offer these surgeries to people where you take a healthy body and you swap out for an unhealthy body. Not okay. So that's what this movie is. We're going to tell you exactly what the facts are. And God forbid you're facing this in your life, you should be informed.
Absolutely. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen the film yet, and that I'm immediately going to be watching that today, because this is my type of film, and this needs to be known far and wide. When I think of the human body, the show's not a spiritual show per se, but I'm a spiritual kind of guy. And I think of the subtle energy. I think of all the things that go into keeping it alive, the so-called etheric body, or what keeps your lungs breathing and your heart beating, or your subtle energy about your soul, your aura, or what, and the different roles that these things play, and whether you're talking about like natural healing modalities or religion or what. And you think about what we're doing to the physical, what's happening to the spiritual component of the physical of what we're doing. That, to me, I just imagine that getting all knotted up, and that's the sources of these fistulas and these weird deformities, because it's like, this doesn't work this way. And now you're creating
You're gonna really appreciate the movie. I encourage everyone to watch it. You're going to love it. That's exactly what we address. We go right there. It's not like anything else you've seen. It's explosive. It's really eye-opening. I hope to spread it far and wide. That's why we literally made it for free. So it streams. We ask you for a donation. If after you watch it, you've moved, please donate so more people can see it. But we know what's missing from the public square is a true, factual, realistic conversation of what's actually going on here. Like what is gender, quote, gender affirming care that our federal government is pushing hard? What does that mean? What is it? So we give you the answers, and we give you, we tell you who the perpetrators are, and we tell you other resources, places to turn if, God forbid, you're facing this in your life.
That's awesome. What kind of advice would you give a parent who is up against the wall, they're being pressured by their son or daughter to transition? They got the school on their back. They've got the threat of maybe they're in a relationship problem with their spouse, and they're like, oh no, I could lose custody. What would you advise somebody who's trying to stand strong?
Yeah. First thing is, if you're facing this in your life, take a deep breath and hold on. Don't react quickly. Don't react in anger. Just listen until you learn more. My mind has been so opened over the past year. And if I had been facing this a year ago, God forbid, with my child, the way I would have handled it would have been destructive because I didn't know what I didn't know. Now I know a lot more. One of the purposes of this movie is to give you tons of resources so that if you're facing this problem, you can handle it properly. There's much better ways and much worse ways to handle this. In short, you react with empathy, but you don't allow the transitioning to start. But you have to handle that carefully. For example, your child comes home and they say, oh, I'm Jacob. Name was Rachel, but now my name is Jacob. Your first reaction is like, you're grounded. I'm taking away everything. Like I'm not talking, you know what I'm saying? Or your other reaction might be, oh, that's not so bad. It's just a name. What's in a name, right? Neither one is completely correct, neither approach. And we will tell you how to get through that in a way that's best for your family. We've seen successful ways to manage this and disastrous ways to manage this. And it's so overwhelming as a parent. If there's one book, just for the people who are listening who might be facing this, one book that you must read, it would be Lost in Trans Nation by Dr. Grossman. And I knew you're going to go for that. That is the Bible. It is an incredible book. And of course, she's featured in the movie. Don't lose heart. There are ways to navigate this and keep the relationship with the children and the family.
That's awesome.
I just want to say, we also put a lot of resources in case on America's Frontline Doctors, aflds.org/mutilation. We have a ton of resources up there.
Excellent. Well, that's what people need to know right now who are facing this sort of thing. A lot of people also following this show. They're somewhere in the journey. They know a kid, or they're interested in protecting the next generation. As an attorney right now, so much of what needs to be done has to be done legally, because how do you stop people who have the legal right to do what they're doing?
Yeah. So this movie, honestly, I can't endorse it enough, because it's both me as a doctor and me as a lawyer. So we get into the legal aspect of this. We know that there's no informed consent. So the doctors need to be prosecuted for failing to do informed consent and for the crimes that they're committing. So we walk through that as a lawyer. Now, some states are allowing this to be the law of the land. I don't think you should be raising children in those states. I think it's very risky. Most people are not certain. I'm going to talk bluntly here, Robert. Most people don't know that their marriage is going to last 10 years. I myself am divorced. You don't know. I mean, there are a few marriages out there that might be absolutely certain that we're going to go the distance. We're going to be together getting Medicare. But most people, have a little doubt. Anybody who's not rock solid, 100% certain that they're going to be with this person the next 30, 40 years should not be raising kids in these states, because the states give the rights to the grooming parent. And I think that's very risky. You might say, okay, we're not meant to be together as a husband and wife, but I still plan to raise my children as a co-parent, and you are deprived of that opportunity. Again, California, Colorado, Minnesota, there's one or two others. You have to look long and hard at that. There's limits to what can be done in those states, quite frankly. That's why managing this as a parent or an aunt or grandparent is very tricky, and you don't shoot your mouth off. Watch the movie, read that book if this is something you're facing in your life. But seriously consider not living in a state like that if you're raising children. It's very scary in those states. I will say that. But let me not end on a hopeless note, because I'm actually a very optimistic person. So there is a law just introduced in the Senate this week. Stop the I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's against the transgender, the mutilation. It was introduced by Senator Dr. Roger Marshall from Kansas. There's a House bill about male and female that is winding its way through. The president has committed himself to this issue, so the landscape might look very different a year from now.
Absolutely. And then we've got this case that's going on at the Supreme Court right now. The Scarametti.
I'll share people that we filed an amicus brief in that case. That was the state of Tennessee went up against the federal government. The state of Tennessee was trying to protect its children from these mutilating procedures. And the federal government, in the form of Biden and Admiral Rachel Levine, was saying you have to offer these mutilating procedures to children. And it just happened a couple of days ago at the Supreme Court. I was actually there. I think we're going to win this one. The result won't be known until June, but the lawyers fighting were very on our side, were very, very effective. And America's Frontline Doctors did file an amicus brief on that. So we are speaking up for the righteous doctors who are offended at other doctors profiting substantially off the misery of other human beings.
That's awesome. And Gays Against Groomers is involved too. So, we got on as part of this, and this is the kind of thing that we need to win this war. Like, we can shut down. Gays Against Groomers can shut down once, the grooming situation is done. And, there's a lot of hope on the horizon, but there's a lot of persistent people who think that we need what we don't need. So that's awesome that you were down there and that you're involved with that. And also, I apologize for making you basically redo your whole film, because I'm sure once we see what is a doctor, everything I'm asking would be redundant.
It's just honestly, it was important to me to do something that's enjoyable to watch. I really like Matt Walsh's movies, like Am I a Racist or What is a Woman? I want it to be enjoyable for people and also really informative. And also there's just a huge need. It's just not discussed. People ask me why we started to do this movie. And I said, because why are doctors not saying it like it is? I mean, all I hear about is quote gender affirming care, but we're not talking about the fact that you're actually slicing off healthy body parts. I'll give you just one example. We live in a culture that we think we can fix everything. We think we can reverse everything. You think you press a button, you can fix things. You're infertile, you have IVF, and everything's fixable. You have a surrogate. No. Here's one example. If you go through sex puberty blockers for more than 2 years, or about 2 years, I'm not sure the exact number, you will never be able to make sperm or egg. That is not reversible, fixable, changeable. That's it. So of course you can adopt. And of course there's other children in the world that need your love. But how can you do that when you're 14? There's no common law precedent. There's no historical precedent for allowing a child to make a decision like that. And here's an analogy. No 16-year-old girl can walk into an OBGYN doctor's office and say, I'm ready to get my tubal ligation. Even if that 16-year-old girl was the oldest daughter of 8 children and had already raised half the kids for her parents, no doctor can do it, and no insurance company would pay for it. And even a woman in her 20s who had 3 kids would have a hard time getting a doctor to do it. She would find one eventually, but it wouldn't be so fast. It wouldn't be so easy. We're talking about tubal ligation that we don't allow minors to consent to. But you're going to allow them to consent to never letting their body ever make an egg, a viable egg. How is that legal? It's not legal. Watch the movie.
Watch the movie. I love the title, What is a Doctor? It puts us right back, like you were just saying, that same frame of mind with what is a woman. People can't answer what a woman was. We know it's an adult human female. We know it comes down to XX and XY chromosomes. Luckily, that film put the spotlight on that basic question that was paradoxical to answer. Did you, in the process of making What is a Doctor, firmly distinguish the real doctors from all these pseudo doctors?
I think so. I think that my purpose in doing this, the transgender issue is a really big issue, but so is COVID a really big issue. And going forward, so is the fact that doctors are going to think being a eunuch is an okay situation to be. So the real question is, are doctors people who participate in destroying people's bodily health, and are doctors people who deny reality, or are doctors truth tellers and healers? Which is it? So we help you think through, what kind of doctor do I want in my life? And here's a bonus tip for everybody. How can I find a good doctor, right? That's like the question, like, how can I find a good doctor? So I'll just throw it out there. full disclosure, it's my company. So it's goldcare.com. And we've made the system, and it's goldcare.com. And Robert, I definitely hope you check it out. But we've put together for the last 2 to 3 years, doctors across the nation who are righteous doctors, who believe in the Hippocratic Oath, who believe in the doctor-patient relationship. And we give you the truth, and we are there for you. We're there to help you get better and heal. We're not there to mutilate you. We're there to help you become your best self. And that's kind of like the logical question, like, what kind of doctor do I want in my life, and how do I find such a person? And that would be goldcare.com.
I'm definitely going to goldcare.com. That's my biggest problem, is finding doctors or people that think in the way I'm thinking about things. And Dr. Simone Gold has proven that her ideas can withstand the criticism of the entire nation and will be found standing after all of these lies have been burnt down, as we can see they have now. So congratulations on everything you've managed to bring out to the world. It changed the fabric of that time for us and how we went forward. So you played a huge role. We've got just a couple minutes left. So if you would share with us, you've shared with us goldcare.com. We know what is a doctor.org. Is that correct?
Correct.
And anything else you'd like to point our listeners to and viewers?
Yeah, I think that's like enough to give them, but I really want to encourage people to check out goldcare.com. Robert, I hope you check it out. You're going to be hearing a lot about it in 2025. We spent years building this, and this is national telemedicine all across the country, and really, in a way, all across the world. But more importantly, we empower you by giving you all the accurate information. So we have what we call Wellness U, which is all the wellness classes that we do. And we do everything. We talk about, high blood pressure and losing weight and spiritual health. And do you need the shots, like the childhood vaccine schedule? And do I really need to have chemotherapy and radiation? Like, we literally teach you what you need to know. And it took me years to put together like-minded physicians who were in the business of helping you be as healthy as possible. Everyone needs to check it out. We've priced it for everybody to come and join us. We doctors are very upset that people like yourself can't even find righteous doctors. So that's why we've priced it the way we have. Goldcare.com. That is my life's work and my life's passion at this point. WhatisAdoctor.org.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gold. By the way, where can people find you on social media? What's your X handle?
Please come find me at Dr. Simone Gold on Twitter. I post a fair amount. DrSimoneGold. Dr. Simone Gold.
All right. And for all of our listeners, if you are listening on the radio or wherever, you don't know how you found this program, this is a Gays Against Groomers production. So go to gaysagainstgroomers.com. You can learn more about our organization. Go to gaysagainstgroomers.com/podcast regarding this show. And you can find us on Twitter. That's where we're posting constantly. Also, all the proof. They're telling you it's not happening. It's happening. Your schools are dangerous places. And we've got the evidence for you on our X. So just go to Against Groomers. That's Against Groomers with no O's. You can just type that up and you'll see it there. And with that said, we'll see everybody next week. Thank you for joining us.